Aemon Drake wiped the sweat from his brow as the twin suns sank behind the jagged mountains of Virilia. The orange light stretched long shadows across the cracked soil of his farm, highlighting the stubborn rows of genetically engineered crops that fought to survive in the harsh alien climate. Dust swirled in the evening breeze, carrying the metallic scent of the distant mining colony. Most settlers had long abandoned this plot of land, claiming it was cursed by the planet itself, but Aemon stayed. He had no family left, only the land and his stubborn belief that survival meant more than mere endurance. It meant protecting life whenever possible. He was about to call it a night when movement caught his eye. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the jagged rocks. Then he saw it, a figure stumbling through the field. Small, trembling, covered in silvery scales that glinted in the dying light. In its arms, a tiny creature barely bigger than his hand clung to life. The mother's eyes, large, glowing faintly, met his, and for a moment Aemon froze. Fear? Hunger? Or a silent plea for help? He took a cautious step forward. "It's okay," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if she could understand. The mother lowered her head slightly, exposing the child's weak, fragile body. Aemon's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous. Rumors of alien raiders attacking settlers were everywhere, but something in the way the mother trembled, the helplessness in her stance, made him pause. Humanity, he thought, was defined not by caution alone but by the courage to act when others would turn away. Aemon stepped closer, hands raised in calm, deliberate movements. The mother shifted back slightly, growling softly, a sound that vibrated through the ground. The infant whimpered. Aemon felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years. Responsibility not for crops or machines, but for a life entirely alien to him. "I won't hurt you," he said again. The mother's glowing eyes flickered, as if searching for deception and finding none. He grabbed a worn satchel and pulled out nutrient gel packs, the kind he used to feed his automated livestock. He set one on the ground and stepped back. The mother hesitated, but hunger won over fear. The child nibbled weakly, its tiny wings shivering. Aemon noticed scars along the mother's scales, evidence of a recent struggle. The scavengers were close, he realized. Every act of mercy here carried risk, and yet turning away felt impossible. He gestured toward his small, reinforced home on the edge of the farm. "Come with me. I can help." The mother's pulse glowed faintly, a sign Aemon learned to read as a kind of alien emotion. She hesitated, but slowly, step by step, she moved toward him, keeping the child tucked against her chest. Every movement was tense, cautious. He noticed the rough terrain had cut her limbs in several places, and instinctively, he planned his next steps. First aid, shelter, protection. Survival in Virilia was not granted, it was carved with ingenuity and courage. Inside his modest home, Aemon laid out clean cloths and prepared warm nutrient slurry for the infant. The mother watched, staying near the doorway, her body rigid with anxiety. Aemon worked quickly, cleaning the small wounds on her scales with antiseptic he had salvaged from old medical pods. The child ate slowly, gaining some strength, and the mother's pulse began to stabilize. It was the first sign of trust. Night deepened outside. The twin moons rose, casting eerie silver light over the farmland. Every creak of the wind, every rustle in the crops, made Aemon's senses sharpen. The scavengers might still be near, drawn by the faint heat and scent of the alien pair. He activated a perimeter of drones, small machines rigged with sensors and alarm triggers, a fragile shield against the unknown. One misstep, one miscalculation, and it could all be over, human, alien, or both. The mother shifted, letting her pulse flare softly, a soundless language of fear and gratitude. Aemon studied her carefully. He did not speak her tongue, but he understood intent. She was cautious, aware, calculating. Her instincts mirrored his own. Survival was a test of intelligence as much as strength. He felt an unexpected kinship, not just to the creature but to the idea that courage was measured by protecting the weak, even when the odds were stacked impossibly high. Then a noise from the far edge of the field made him freeze. A shadow moved differently from the wind. Something, or someone, was out there watching. Aemon felt the weight of the decision he had made. Mercy had invited risk. He looked at the mother and her child. They had nothing to defend themselves, and now his farm, his carefully managed sanctuary, was a potential battlefield. Aemon reached for his flashlight and a modified energy baton, the tools of a human who had long lived with danger. His heartbeat quickened. Protecting life on Virilia was never simple, and tonight, he realized, would test him more than any drought, any failed harvest, or any storm. He stepped toward the door, signaling the mother to stay back, and the child whimpered again, drawing his attention. The farm was quiet, but the tension thrummed in the air like a live wire. Outside, the shadows were moving closer. Eamon tightened his grip, ready to defend the helpless with whatever courage and skill humanity had given him. The night was far from over, and the first real challenge of this fragile alliance had just begun. The twin suns dipped below jagged peaks, casting Eamon Drake's farm in long, trembling shadows. The orange glow streaked across cracked soil where his genetically engineered crops struggled to survive. Virilia was a harsh world. Dust and grit blew constantly, carrying the metallic tang of distant mining colonies and the acrid smell of scorched rocks. Most settlers abandoned this place long ago, calling it cursed. Yet Eamon stayed. Survival wasn't enough for him. He believed life had value no matter how alien. He worked methodically, scanning rows of crops for stress, checking water regulators, tending to the smallest sprouts as if each one were a fragile heartbeat. A sudden flicker at the edge of his field caught his eye. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, but movement solidified into form. Small, silvery, trembling. A creature unlike any Eamon had catalogued stumbled across his crops, its limbs awkward and unsteady. Nestled in its arms was a smaller form, tiny, quivering, clearly on the brink of death. The mother's eyes, luminous and liquid, fixed on him. They were full of something he recognized, fear, but also pleading and almost human appeal. He froze. Every survival instinct screamed to stay back. Alien raiders prowled Virilia, hunting settlers and weak species alike. Yet the way she lowered her head, revealing the child's fragile form, pulled at something deeper. Humanity, he thought, was defined not by caution alone but by courage, the ability to act when others would turn away. Eamon stepped forward slowly, careful not to startle her. "I won't hurt you," he said softly, though he doubted if she understood words. The mother stiffened, a low hum vibrating through her chest, a sound that carried both warning and desperation. Eamon paused, letting silence speak. The child whimpered weakly. His decision crystallized. Turning away was impossible. He retrieved a satchel filled with nutrient gel packs and set one on the ground, stepping back. The mother hesitated, eyeing him, but hunger overrode caution. The child nibbled, tiny wings quivering. Eamon noticed scars along the mother's scales. She had been in a fight recently. The scavengers were near, he realized. Each act of kindness carried risk. Yet he could not leave them to die. Gesturing toward his small home at the edge of the field, he repeated, "Come with me. I can help." The mother's pulse flared softly, a color he learned to read as emotion, trust battling fear. Step by cautious step, she approached, child held close, eyes never leaving him. Eamon's mind raced. First aid, shelter, protection. Survival was not granted on Virilia, it had to be engineered. Inside, he laid out clean cloths and prepared warm nutrient slurry for the infant. The mother stayed near the doorway, rigid with anxiety. Eamon cleaned her wounds with antiseptic, careful not to startle her. She watched every movement, gauging intent. Slowly, her pulse stabilized, a small victory of trust. The child drank more eagerly now, and Eamon felt a spark of hope ignite. The night deepened and the twin moons rose, casting silver over the farmland. Every sound, the creak of wind on support beams, the rustle of crops, heightened his senses. The scavengers could still be near, drawn by heat, scent, or sound. He activated drones around the perimeter, fragile sentinels designed to warn of movement. One misstep and both human and alien could die. The mother shifted, a soft pulse radiating from her scales, communicating fear, relief, and gratitude in a silent rhythm. Eamon focused on it, realizing they were learning each other's language without words. She understood his calm meant no harm, and he understood her need to survive. A fragile bond formed, suspended on trust alone. A sudden sound from the far edge of the field froze him. Something moved with intent, too deliberate for wind or wildlife. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. Eamon's heartbeat quickened. His farm, his sanctuary, was now a potential battleground. He had chosen mercy, and mercy had consequences. He picked up a flashlight and his modified energy baton. The mother instinctively pressed closer to the child, her pulse flaring again. Eamon gave a slow nod, signaling her to stay behind. He stepped toward the door, senses straining, every muscle ready. Shadows moved again, confirming his suspicion. He was being watched. The scavengers were closer than he thought. Eamon's mind calculated possibilities: defensive traps, drone interference, terrain advantage. The mother's child whimpered, drawing his attention and stealing his resolve. They had no weapons, no defenses beyond instinct. Tonight, his courage and ingenuity would be tested. The farm was quiet, but tension hummed in the air like a live wire. One mistake, one hesitation, and it could all end here. He adjusted the drones, double-checking their energy shields, and waited, flashlight beam cutting through darkness, ears straining for the first sign of movement. His chest tightened as the distant shadows shifted again, closer, deliberate. Eamon knew that Virelia's night would bring more than wind and cold, it would bring a reckoning. And when it arrived, his humanity, his courage, and his will to protect the helpless would be all that stood between life and death. The mother's pulse flared sharply, almost as if she sensed the danger before it fully arrived. Eamon's hand tightened around the baton. The night was no longer a quiet respite. It was the first challenge of an alliance forged in risk and hope. And the first move had yet to be made. Eamon sat on the edge of his doorway, scanning the horizon with a sharp, practiced eye. The night had been restless. Strange noises, footfalls too deliberate for the wind, echoed through the farmland. His drones hummed faintly, moving in precise circuits, scanning for life signs. Lyra, the alien mother, crouched near the doorway, her pulsing glow dim but steady, holding her child close. She had begun to respond to his subtle gestures, a silent language forming between them. Still, fear lingered, sharp and tangible. He had learned something crucial the night before. The scavengers were not mindless predators. They coordinated, using patterns that hinted at intelligence and strategy. Every drone he deployed, every noise he made was observed, catalogued, and tested. Survival on Virelia demanded more than courage. It demanded cunning. Eamon rubbed his beard, thinking through possibilities. He could not simply wait and react. He had to act. He moved to the center of his field, where a line of saplings cast long shadows. Using fragments of old agricultural tech, he rigged decoy heat signatures. Small generators pulsed in irregular intervals, mimicking the body heat of humans and livestock. He added chemical scent markers to simulate living creatures. Lyra's eyes followed every movement, and he noticed a faint pulsing in sync with the generators. She understood, somehow, that he was creating a trap. Trust had become an active collaboration. Hours passed. The scavengers approached, drawn by the smell and warmth. They moved with eerie precision, splitting into groups to flank what they thought were easy targets. Eamon crouched low, baton in hand, his mind calculating angles, timing, and potential escape routes. The first line of scavengers walked straight into the decoys, stopping mid-step as the heat signatures blinked and pulsed erratically. Confused, they scanned the fields and Eamon saw his chance. He activated a drone cluster overhead. They emitted a blinding flash of light, designed to disorient predators with sensitive eyes like these. Lyra's scales glowed brightly, amplifying the effect. The scavengers hissed, recoiled, and backed off, but not all were fooled. One massive, jagged-scaled creature approached from the left, moving with predatory intelligence. Eamon realized it had observed his movements and learned from them. This wasn't just a hunt, it was a test. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward a hidden pit covered with flexible mesh. He had reinforced it with remnants of old farm machinery. The scavenger noticed him, surging forward, jaws snapping. Eamon dodged at the last second, triggering the pit. The creature tumbled in, thrashing but trapped. Adrenaline surged through him. Humanity's strength wasn't in brute force alone. It was timing, anticipation, and the ability to improvise under pressure. Lyra's child whimpered from inside the doorway. Eamon paused, listening. The smaller predators were regrouping, testing his defenses, moving cautiously. He realized he couldn't fight them all directly. Instead, he needed to manipulate them, turn their instincts against each other. He adjusted the drone's patterns, flickering lights in a way that mimicked movement from multiple directions. The scavengers became uncertain, shifting in confusion, losing cohesion. Lyra's scales began pulsing in complex rhythms. Eamon watched closely and suddenly understood. Her pulses were coordinating with the drones. Together, they created a disorienting pattern of light and heat. Predators hesitated and some retreated into the shadows, unsure which signal was real. For the first time, he saw cooperation between species. Alien intelligence and human ingenuity were forming a defense no predator could easily overcome. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat ran down his face and his muscles ached, but he kept moving, adjusting traps, watching both Lyra and the predators. One scavenger, cleverer than the rest, leaped toward the child. Eamon reacted instinctively, diving forward, baton crackling with energy, and struck a weak point he had studied in scavenger anatomy from old reports. The creature collapsed with a sharp hiss. Lyra emitted a pulse of light so bright it bathed the field like a second sun, a signal of relief and gratitude. Eamon exhaled, shoulders trembling, and looked at her. The bond between them was no longer fragile. Trust had been tested under fire and survived. "You see," he said quietly, "humans survive not just by strength but by thinking, by acting when it counts." Lyra's pulses slowed, steadying again as if acknowledging the lesson. The child nuzzled her, gaining strength after the ordeal. He knew the night was not over. The scavenger pack could regroup and return in greater numbers, more cunning than before. But Eamon also knew something crucial. They had underestimated human intelligence and resilience. By combining his experience with Lyra's instincts, he had turned impossible odds into a tactical advantage. As dawn approached, the first weak light glimmered over the jagged mountains. Shadows shifted in the distance. Eamon adjusted the final drones, checked the pit traps, and prepared for the next wave. Lyra stepped closer to him, her glowing scales brushing against his arm, a silent promise of cooperation. Humanity had faced death and survived, not through weapons alone but through courage, intelligence, and daring empathy. Eamon allowed himself a brief smile. The scavengers had tested him. He had responded. And in doing so he had forged something rare, a partnership between human and alien, trust born in the crucible of danger. But he did not relax. The horizon held more threats, and tonight had proven that survival on Virilia demanded constant vigilance. The true challenge was still ahead, the one that would decide whether he, Lyra, and her child would live to see another sunrise. The night air was heavy, vibrating with tension. Eamon crouched behind a low ridge at the edge of his farm, his energy baton humming softly in his hand. The scavengers had regrouped. Their numbers had swelled and their coordination had sharpened. Eamon counted at least a dozen of them moving in staggered lines across the field, their jagged scales catching the pale light of the twin moons. They were clever, relentless, and hungry, and tonight they wanted more than a meal. Inside his home, Lyra pulsed faintly, holding her child close. Her scales reflected fear but also trust. She had learned his patterns, his rhythms, the ways humans anticipated danger. Eamon glanced at her, silently promising that he would protect them. Humanity's courage wasn't recklessness, it was the decision to face impossible odds and act anyway. He activated the first wave of drones. They darted above the field, blinking with irregular light patterns designed to confuse predators. Heat decoys flickered across the ground. The scavengers hesitated, assessing the battlefield. Some leaped toward decoys, some crouched to stalk shadows. Eamon's mind raced. Every movement had to be precise. One mistake could mean death for him, Lyra, and her child. He darted forward, drawing one of the larger scavengers toward a reinforced pit trap. The creature snarled and lunged, jaws snapping, but Eamon twisted at the last second, landing on solid ground while the scavenger plunged into the pit. Its screech echoed across the farmland, startling the rest. He pressed a hand to the dirt, signaling Lyra to emit a synchronized pulse. Her glowing scales flashed in rapid bursts, creating a rhythm the drones amplified. The predators recoiled, confused by the combined human-alien signal. But more were coming. One massive scavenger, bigger than the rest, circled the perimeter, testing their defenses. It had learned from previous encounters. Eamon's mind raced. There wasn't time to retreat. He had to turn the predator's intelligence against itself. Using a decoy drone, he lured it toward a narrow channel between two ridges. Then, with a sharp flick of his wrist, he triggered a sudden burst of heat from buried generators. The predator froze, caught between conflicting stimuli. Eamon charged, striking a weak point along its flank, honed from old biology reports. The creature roared, staggering, giving him the opening to push it into the pit with a heavy panel. Lyra pulsed brightly now, almost blinding in her intensity. Eamon realized she was coordinating her pulses with the drones, creating a symphony of light, heat, and movement. Every scavenger hesitated, unsure which signals were real. Their unity broke down. They began attacking each other in confusion, giving Eamon the advantage. Humanity's strength lay not just in courage, but in adapting, anticipating, and using intelligence to overcome raw power. The child whimpered from inside the home. Eamon sprinted back, grabbing it carefully, shielding it with his body. Another scavenger had managed to slip through, moving with lethal precision. He swung the baton, striking its flank and sending it retreating. Lyra's pulse intensified and the remaining predators faltered, finally deciding retreat was safer than attack. One by one they slunk back into the darkness, leaving the field littered with scorched heat traps, stunned creatures, and the echoes of a night-long battle. Eamon collapsed to the ground, chest heaving, sweat and dirt covering his body. Lyra stepped forward, her scales dimming to a gentle glow. She extended a limb toward him, and though he did not fully understand her language, he felt the gratitude radiating in her pulse. The child clung to her, safe and alive. For the first time in days, there was silence on the farmland, a hard-won stillness that spoke of survival, not surrender. Kara, his neighbor, emerged cautiously from the shadows, her eyes wide. I thought they'd overwhelm you, she whispered. Eamon shook his head, still catching his breath. We adapted. We used what we knew. They underestimated us. His voice was tired but steady. This was humanity in its truest form. Courage tempered by intelligence, action guided by empathy, and the refusal to yield to fear. Eamon looked over the field. Traps, drones, and decoys, tools of his ingenuity, had turned near-certain death into survival. Lyra's scales glimmered in patterns of emotion he could almost understand now. She had taught him her language and pulses, and he had taught her that humans could be allies, not predators. The bond was fragile but real, forged in fire and fear. As dawn approached, the first weak rays of sunlight touched the jagged mountains. The farm, scarred and battered, stood as a testament to human resilience. Eamon knelt beside Lyra and her child. We made it, he said softly. His words weren't just reassurance. They were a declaration of triumph. Against impossible odds, humans had not just survived, they had protected life that others deemed expendable. Courage, ingenuity, and empathy had won. Lyra pulsed once more, a slow, steady beat that conveyed something like peace. Eamon understood. They were allies now, their fates intertwined. Humanity had proven yet again that it could rise above fear and danger, not through sheer strength alone, but through the combination of mind, heart, and unyielding determination. But even as sunlight bathed the farmland, Eamon's eyes remained sharp. Virilia was unforgiving and challenges would come again. Yet tonight had shown something vital. Humans could face the impossible, and not just survive but inspire hope in the most unlikely of allies. He stood, brushing dust from his shoulders. Lyra's child stirred, safe in his arms. The farm was quiet, but Eamon knew that true peace was earned, not given. Humanity had defended life, outsmarted death, and carved victory from a night of shadows. And tomorrow they would face the world together, stronger than any one species alone. The first light of dawn stretched across the jagged peaks of Virilia, painting the land in soft gold and pink. Eamon Drake stood at the edge of his field, watching the twin suns rise. The air was still, carrying only the faint hum of his drones and the gentle stirrings of life he had fought to protect. For the first time in days he allowed himself a deep breath. The scavengers had retreated, the night's battle over, and the alien mother and her child were safe. Lyra stepped out from the doorway, her scales glowing faintly in the morning light. The child clung to her, eyes bright, no longer trembling. She approached him slowly and Eamon felt the pulse of her emotions, relief, gratitude, and something he recognized as hope. The alien language of light and rhythm had become almost tangible, a bridge between species. Humans had fought and survived countless trials, but this was different. Here, humanity had inspired trust and forged an alliance where fear once reigned. Eamon knelt and offered his hand, palm open. Lyra extended a glowing limb to meet it. The pulse that passed between them was more than communication. It was acknowledgement. Trust had been earned, not demanded. In protecting the helpless, humans had shown courage, intelligence, and morality in a world that often seemed hostile to all life. Kara Tennies emerged from the shadows, her expression a mixture of awe and relief. I didn't think you'd make it, she said quietly. Eamon shook his head, brushing dust from his sleeves. They underestimated us. Humanity survives not because we are the strongest but because we are the cleverest, and sometimes the most compassionate. His words were simple but heavy with truth. Across the farm, small repairs were underway. Drones hummed softly, repairing minor damage while Lyra tended to the child. Eamon had prepared a nutrient-rich slurry, enough to sustain them for weeks, and he knew that with careful planning, the mother and child could regain their strength fully. This world demanded adaptation and humans were masters of it. Every strategy, every trap, every quick decision had counted. The night had tested them, but humans had prevailed. Eamon walked the perimeter, checking the pit traps and energy nets one last time. The field was scarred, a battlefield disguised as farmland, but it was his domain now. Humanity's courage had carved order out of chaos, creating safety where danger had threatened to reign. The scavengers might return, but they would think twice before testing human intelligence again. Survival had been secured through strategy, daring, and a willingness to act when others would hesitate. Lyra's pulses shifted, slower now, steady, almost contemplative. Eamon knelt beside her and the child. "You're safe," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "For now at least. But the world is harsh. We have to stay vigilant." She tilted her head, glowing in a way that seemed to affirm his words. She had learned, in these few days, that humans were not just survivors, they were protectors. The child stirred, blinking tiny, luminous eyes at him. Eamon smiled, a rare warmth crossing his weathered face. The infant alien had survived because of human courage and ingenuity. Life, he realized, was not merely about surviving. It was about choosing to act for others, even when the odds were stacked impossibly high. That choice, made in fear, made in risk, was humanity's defining strength. Kara approached, carrying a makeshift supply kit. "We should document this," she said. "Others need to know what's possible. Humans, and allies like Lyra, can survive anything if we work together." Eamon nodded. Knowledge and example, he thought, were as powerful as any weapon. Sharing the story of this night could inspire settlers across Virilia to act with courage and intelligence, reinforcing the same HFY ideals that had saved these lives. The twin suns climbed higher, casting long golden rays across the farmland. Birds, native to the harsher edges of Virilia, began to stir, their cries a delicate chorus over the scarred land. Lyra's child opened its mouth in a soft, melodic coo, reaching toward him. Eamon extended his hand, allowing the tiny creature to explore, connecting species through trust. The moment was fragile, perfect, and fleeting, but it carried the weight of victory. He stepped back and surveyed the farm from the ridge. The crops, the drones, the repair traps, they all represented more than survival. They were evidence of what humans could do, transform danger into opportunity, fear into hope. He had faced impossible odds, protected the weak, and demonstrated that human courage and intelligence could create safety where none existed. Eamon allowed himself a final, deep breath. Lyra pulsed slowly beside him, the child safe at her chest. The bond between them was a symbol of hope. Not just for these 3 lives, but for every human who dared to stand against the impossible. They had survived. They had learned. They had inspired. And in the vast, unforgiving expanse of Virilia, humanity had proven that courage, ingenuity, and morality were weapons stronger than any predator. The twin suns now shone fully over the horizon. Shadows retreated, light claimed the land, and a new day began. Eamon looked at Lyra and the child, and in that quiet moment he understood something fundamental. Humans could not only survive the stars, they could lead, protect, and ignite hope in the darkest corners of the galaxy. And somewhere deep inside, he smiled at the thought that even in a universe full of unknowns, human courage could shine brighter than any danger.